At my dad's funeral, when the lawyer read the will, my stepbrother inherited millions from the firm while I was left with nothing but an old house and a sealed letter. Everyone laughed, until I opened it and left them stunned with a shocking surprise they never imagined. My name is Olivia Carter, and the day my life broke open began with the smell of wet pavement and lilies at my father's funeral. Chicago skies were gray, heavy with rain, as if the whole city had decided to mourn with me. I had buried my only parent, the man who raised me after my mother died when I was little, and all I wanted was a quiet corner to grieve. Instead, I found myself walking into a tall glass building downtown where the will was to be read. I remember the air in that conference room was too cold, the table too shiny, and my hands too restless. Linda, my stepmother, was already seated, her legs crossed, a black dress that looked more like evening wear than morning. She gave me a smile that never reached her eyes. "Olivia," she said in her sweet but empty voice, "you look exhausted. Grief does that." Before I could answer, Ryan walked in. My stepbrother, her son from her first marriage, was polished in a gray suit, carrying himself like he had already won. He gave me a short nod, the kind that said I wasn't worth more. I hadn't expected kindness, but a part of me still hoped for decency. Mr. Harrington, the lawyer, cleared his throat and opened a thick leather folder. His voice was steady, but I felt my pulse race with every word. Per the last will and testament of Richard Carter, he began, the majority of company shares and financial assets are to be transferred to Ryan Carter. The words hit me like stones. Millions. The company my father built from his sweat and grit, the company I had watched him nurture since I was a child, was placed into Ryan's hands. Ryan leaned back in his chair, trying not to smirk, but his eyes flickered with triumph. And to his daughter, Olivia Carter, the lawyer continued, Richard Carter leaves the property located at 9215 Ash Grove and its contents. I froze. The Ash Grove house. A weathered old place on the south edge of the city. A house my father rarely spoke about. It wasn't worth much, and it hadn't seen care in years. I looked at the lawyer as if he had made a mistake, but his expression didn't waver. Ryan chuckled under his breath. "Well," he said, "that seems about right. You always liked old things, Olivia. That house should suit you." Linda covered her mouth like she was trying to hide her amusement. "Richard was sentimental," she said softly, her pearls catching the light. "He wanted you to have something personal." The humiliation burned inside me, but then Mr. Harrington slid a sealed envelope across the table. My name was written in my father's careful handwriting. "This," he said, "was left for you to read privately." I took the envelope in both hands. It felt heavier than paper should feel, as if it carried more than words. My throat tightened. I couldn't bring myself to speak, so I stood and walked out of that cold room, Ryan's smirk following me like a shadow. I found an empty lounge with tall windows overlooking the Chicago River. I sat down and broke the seal. My father's handwriting spilled across the page. "Liv, if you're reading this, I didn't get to tell you what I should have. I fear my death was not natural. If anything happens to me, be careful of Linda and Ryan. Do not confront them until you have proof. I've hidden records and notes in the Ash Grove house. They will explain everything. I trust you. Please be strong, but also careful. Love, Dad." I read the letter again and again, my hands trembling. Not natural. Be careful. Hidden records. My heart pounded, and suddenly the room felt smaller, the walls closing in. My father hadn't trusted Linda and Ryan. He had left me that house for a reason. The walk to my car was a blur. I didn't answer my phone, didn't look back at the glass tower. My old hatchback rattled to life, and I drove through the city streets with the letter burning in my bag like a live ember. Rain streaked across the windshield, traffic lights glowing in the wet night, but all I could hear was my father's warning. By the time I reached the neighborhood where Ash Grove stood, the rain had turned to mist. The house looked the same as I remembered, small, tired, sagging porch steps, a maple tree leaning as though it carried the house's weight. The chain-link fence squeaked when I pushed it open. I had been here only a few times as a child, never with any sense that it mattered. But now it was all that mattered. The key still fit. The door opened to stale air and dust. I turned on a single yellow light bulb in the living room. Furniture sat under white sheets like ghosts waiting for me. On the wall hung a crooked photograph of me and Dad, both of us smiling, his arm tight around my shoulders. I whispered, "I'm here, Dad." The house answered with silence. I boiled water on a rusted kettle I found in the kitchen and poured myself tea, sitting at the old wooden table. I spread out a notebook and began scribbling what I knew. Dad's death, the will, the letter, Ash Grove. My pen pressed too hard, the words jagged and uneven. Hidden records, I wrote 3 times, underlined each. Then I searched. I moved through every room with a flashlight, checking drawers, lifting rugs, tapping walls. The air smelled of old wood and secrets. My father had left something here for me. I could feel it. In the study at the back, I found the old oak desk he used when he first started his business. The drawers were filled with nothing but worn pencils and faded receipts. But the wall behind the desk caught my eye. The paint there looked slightly darker, the texture uneven. I pushed the desk aside, pressed my knuckles to the wall, and knocked. Solid, then hollow, then solid again. My breath caught. I fetched a small utility knife from the kitchen and cut along the hollow section, my hand shaking with each stroke. The drywall gave way. Behind it was a cavity, dark and dusty. I reached inside and pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown fabric and tied with twine. My flashlight beam shook as I laid it on the desk. Slowly, I untied the twine. Inside were several spiral notebooks, a stack of manila folders, and a small metal tin with a keyhole. My father's notebooks, the same kind he always carried. On the first page of the top notebook, I saw the date, 3 months before he died. The words on the first line made my blood run cold. If anything happens to me, this is where the truth begins. Before I could read further, a sound creaked outside. The porch groaned like someone had stepped on it. My heart froze. I turned off the flashlight and waited, my ears straining. Nothing. No second step, no knock, no voice. Maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe not. I locked the front door, checked the windows, and returned to the desk. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number lit up the screen. I ignored it, but then another message came through. "Don't stay there alone tonight." I stared at it, my chest tight. Another buzz. "If you found what I think you did, call me. We should talk." The house felt smaller, the walls closer, the night outside pressing harder. I looked down at the notebooks and the tin, my father's words waiting like a doorway I wasn't sure I was ready to open. My father told me to be strong, but also to be careful. That night, I sat with the weight of his secrets and the echo of that warning, wondering who had sent that message and what truth was about to unravel. And I knew nothing in my life would ever be the same again. That night in the Ash Grove house, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards made me sit up, convinced someone was outside watching. The notebooks stayed on the desk beside me, waiting like unopened doors. When morning finally came, the light through the blinds felt like a small mercy. I made instant coffee with water from a bottle I had brought and finally opened the first notebook. My father's handwriting filled the page, steady but urgent. He wrote about headaches that had started months before, stomach pains that wouldn't go away, and sudden fatigue he couldn't explain. The doctors said stress. Linda insisted it was diet. But Dad wrote that he suspected poison. "I can't prove it yet," the page read, "but I feel it in my bones. If I'm wrong, forgive me. If I'm right, then live, you need to know." My hands trembled as I turned the pages. He had tracked everything, dates of his symptoms, meals he ate, medications Linda gave him. Some entries were messy, rushed, as if written in fear. The manila folders were full of financial papers, copies of company records, wire transfers, and notes about large sums of money shifted into accounts linked to Linda and Ryan. At first I didn't understand, but then the pattern became clear. They had been siphoning money, covering their tracks through shell companies. Dad had discovered it, and suddenly the timing of his death felt sinister, not tragic. The small metal tin remained locked. I shook it gently and heard the faint rattle of something inside, maybe a key, maybe more papers. I didn't have the courage to force it open yet. Instead, I sat back and thought about the messages I'd received the night before. Don't stay there alone. If you found what I think you did, call me. Who knew about this? Who was trying to warn me? By mid-morning, my nerves pushed me to act. I searched online for private investigators in Chicago, reading reviews until one name stood out: David Miller. His reputation was solid, the kind of man people trusted when no one else would listen. I dialed his number, my voice shaky when he answered. Mr. Miller, I said, my name is Olivia Carter. I think my father was murdered. There was silence, then a calm reply. Come by my office. Bring whatever you have. His office was in an older brick building near downtown. He was in his early 40s, tall with sharp eyes that seemed to measure every word I said. I laid the notebooks and folders on his desk. He listened without interrupting as I told him about the will, the letter, the hidden wall. He leafed through the documents, his brow tightening. You're not imagining things, he said finally. These records show deliberate fraud. And the medical symptoms your father wrote down, they match slow poisoning. Hearing someone else say it made the fear heavier but also clearer. I wasn't losing my mind. My father had been killed, and the people responsible were sitting comfortably in his house with his money. David leaned back. You need proof that holds up in court. Medical records, bank statements, witnesses. Without it, suspicion won't get you far. But with it, we can build a case. Can you help me? I asked. He nodded. That's what I do. But you need to be careful. If Linda or Ryan suspects you could be in danger. The words sank into me like ice. Still, I agreed. He copied the documents and kept the originals safe in his office. He told me to check the Ashgrove house for more hiding places and to let him handle the rest. Back at the house, I searched again. Behind another panel in the study, I found a small envelope with test results, blood work, and toxicology reports. Dad must have gone to a private lab. The results showed traces of arsenic in his system. I sat on the floor with the paper shaking in my hands. This was no longer just suspicion. It was evidence. That evening I called David and told him what I'd found. His voice was steady. Good. That confirms what he feared. Keep everything locked up. I'll run checks on Linda and Ryan's accounts. The nights grew heavier. I slept with the notebooks beside me, a chair propped against the door. More texts came from the unknown number. They know more than you think. Don't trust anyone in that house. I didn't reply, but the warnings kept me awake. Within days, David uncovered proof that Linda had pressured my father into revising his will just weeks before he died. Ryan, meanwhile, had been preparing to liquidate assets and cut me out completely. Together, they had orchestrated everything. The money, the inheritance, and, worst of all, my father's death. I kept hearing Dad's words from the letter. Be strong, but be careful. Every time I looked at Linda's face in my memories, her fake concern, her cold eyes, I felt anger harden inside me. And Ryan's smug grin haunted me. He thought he had won. One evening, while reviewing the notebooks, I found an entry Dad had written just days before his death. If Liv finds this, she must know. I fear Linda has been adding something to my tea. She insists on preparing it every night. I have hidden samples in the tin. They will prove everything. My breath caught. The locked tin wasn't just holding papers. It held the last piece of proof. I went to the hardware store and bought a small lockpick set, clumsy in my hands. Back at the house, I worked on the tin until the lock gave way with a click. Inside were several small glass vials, each labeled with dates. Dark residue clung to the bottom of each. My stomach turned, but I knew what they were: samples of poison tea. The next morning, David arranged for lab testing. When the results came back, they showed high levels of arsenic. The case against Linda and Ryan was no longer just theory. It was undeniable. But with the truth came danger. David warned me, they may realize you're digging. Watch your back. And he was right. That same week, I noticed a black car idling near the Ashgrove house late at night. Once, I heard footsteps on the porch again, heavier this time. When I opened the door, no one was there. My phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. "They're watching you. Don't be alone too long." I realized then that my father's death was only the beginning. The secret in his letter had opened a door, and on the other side was betrayal deeper than I had ever imagined. Linda and Ryan had stolen his life, his company, and nearly everything he built. And I was the only one left to fight for him. That night, as I sat in the dim light of the Ashgrove study, I promised myself I would not stop. No matter how dangerous it became, I would see this through. Justice for my father was the only way forward. And in that silence, I knew the fight had only just begun. The days after I discovered the vials in the tin blurred together like one long, restless night. Every sound outside the Ashgrove house put me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. David called often, checking in, reminding me to stay cautious. "You've got evidence that could ruin them," he said. "Don't underestimate what they'll do to protect themselves." His words rang in my ears whenever I looked at the notebooks or the vials hidden safely in a locked box under my bed. I still had not spoken directly to Linda or Ryan since the reading of the will, though Ryan left me a few mocking voicemails, pretending to be concerned about how I was holding up. I didn't answer. I knew now that behind his casual tone was fear, because soon he and his mother would lose everything. What they didn't know was that I had proof strong enough to bring the police to their door. One evening, David came by the house. He stood in the study, holding a folder of documents. "I've traced the accounts," he said. "Linda and Ryan funneled millions from the company into hidden investments. Fraud, money laundering, it's all here. But the real key is the medical evidence. Those vials prove your father was poisoned. Combined with the journals and the testimony of anyone who saw Linda serving his tea, it's enough to open a criminal case." "Then why haven't we gone to the police yet?" I asked, frustration slipping into my voice. "Because timing matters," he said. "We need to make sure everything lines up. If they get wind of this before we're ready, they'll disappear or destroy evidence. I want the case airtight." I nodded, but patience was hard to summon. I wanted to see them pay. I wanted to watch their faces when the truth stripped away their smugness. But I also knew he was right. If we moved too soon, they could escape justice. Late that night, when I was alone again, I read through more of my father's journals. His words grew more desperate toward the end. He described how Linda would hover while he ate, how Ryan seemed impatient for him to sign paperwork. One entry stopped me cold. I overheard Linda telling Ryan, "Once this is finished, everything will be ours. Olivia will get nothing." My chest ached as I read it, imagining my father, weak and sick, hearing the people closest to him plotting his end. The next day, David arranged a meeting with a retired housekeeper who had worked for my father and Linda years earlier. We met her at a small cafe on the west side. She was an older woman named Marisol, with tired eyes and a voice heavy with guilt. "I left because I couldn't stand the tension," she said, stirring her coffee. "But I remember things. Linda always insisted on serving Richard's drinks herself. Sometimes he argued, said he could pour his own tea, but she wouldn't let him. And once, I heard them fighting. Richard said he wanted to change his will back. Linda told him it was too late, that Ryan deserved everything. I knew something was wrong, but I never thought." Her voice cracked, and she covered her face with her hands. David leaned forward gently. "Would you be willing to share this with the police when the time comes?" Marisol hesitated, then nodded. "For Richard. He was a good man. He didn't deserve what they did to him." Walking back to the car, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because we had another piece of the puzzle, heavier because the betrayal was deeper than I had even imagined. My stepmother and stepbrother had not only stolen money, but they had stolen my father's life with cold calculation. That night, I stayed awake, thinking about all the moments when Linda pretended to care for me. How she had brushed my hair once when I was a teenager, calling me sweet girl. How Ryan had laughed with me at a family barbecue, flipping burgers while Dad teased us. None of it was real. It was all part of their game, their greed. And I realized I no longer felt fear of them. I felt anger, and it burned stronger every day. A week later, David told me he was ready to approach his contacts in law enforcement. He wanted to deliver the evidence in one organized package: financial fraud, medical proof, witness testimony. Once we hand this over, he said, it won't take long. They'll be arrested. But, Olivia, you need to prepare yourself. Court cases are slow. They'll fight back, and it won't be easy. I don't care if it takes years, I said. As long as they don't get away with it. That same night, as I returned to the Ashgrove house, I noticed the front door wasn't fully closed. My heart leapt into my throat. I knew I had locked it. Slowly, I stepped inside. The lights were off, but the smell of cologne lingered in the air. Someone had been here. I checked the study. The notebooks and tin were still hidden where I left them, but one of the desk drawers was open. My skin prickled. They knew. My phone buzzed as I stood frozen in the room. Another message from the unknown number appeared. They won't stop until you're silenced. Leave the house tonight. I clutched the phone, torn between fear and defiance. Whoever was sending these warnings had to know more than they were telling me. But I couldn't just run. This house held my father's secrets, his voice in every page of those notebooks. I called David and told him what happened. His voice was steady but firm. Pack a bag and stay at a hotel tonight. Don't argue. If they know you have the evidence, you're in real danger. Reluctantly, I did what he said. I left the house with the notebooks, the folders, and the tin locked in a case, my father's legacy clutched to my chest. As I drove through the dark streets toward a cheap motel, I felt a mix of terror and determination. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my father's memory, for the truth he tried to leave me, for justice against the people who had destroyed him. That night in the motel, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about the moment in the lawyer's office when everyone laughed at me for inheriting a broken-down house. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had won. But inside that house was the very thing that would destroy them. And I promised myself I would not stop until Linda and Ryan were in handcuffs, facing the weight of everything they had done. The fight was no longer just about grief. It was about justice. And I was ready to give everything I had to see it through. The morning after I left the Ashgrove house for the motel, I woke with the weight of everything pressing on me, but I also felt sharper, like every nerve in me was awake. David called early. Today's the day, he said. I'm turning everything over to the police. They'll need your statement, too. My chest tightened at the thought of sitting in a station, retelling everything, but I knew it was the only way. My father had trusted me to finish what he started. At the precinct, David spread the documents on a long table in front of two detectives. They flipped through the financial records, the journals, the toxicology reports, and finally the lab results from the vials. Every page felt like another piece of my father's voice coming back to life, speaking the truth he hadn't been able to shout before he died. I gave my statement, my hands clasped so tight the knuckles ached. The detectives asked about Linda and Ryan, about the nights I'd heard footsteps on the porch, about the threatening texts. I told them everything. By the end of the meeting, one detective leaned back and exhaled slowly. This is strong. It'll hold. We'll move quickly. The next 48 hours were a blur. David kept in touch constantly, making sure I wasn't alone, making sure I stayed safe. Then, one evening, his call came with words I'd been waiting for. They've made the arrests. I sat in the motel chair, staring at the peeling wallpaper, my heart hammering. Both of them? Yes. Fraud, conspiracy, and your father's murder. They've been taken into custody. For a long time I couldn't speak. The tears came, hot and sudden, spilling down my face. I thought of Linda's cold smile, Ryan's smug laugh, all the times they dismissed me like I was nothing. Now they were the ones stripped bare. Justice had finally started its course. The trial months later was brutal. I had to stand in court, facing Linda and Ryan across the room. Linda still tried to carry herself like she was untouchable, pearls around her neck, but the mask cracked when the prosecutors laid out the poison tea, the bank records, the testimony from Marisol, and my father's own words in his journals. Ryan looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, his arrogance gone, replaced by the pale panic of a man cornered. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I closed my eyes and let the words sink into me. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of murder. The life they had stolen from my father, the dignity they had tried to strip from me, was finally answered with truth. They were sentenced to decades in prison, their empire of lies reduced to nothing. After the trial, I returned to the Ashgrove house. The place that had once seemed like an insult had become my sanctuary. The crooked porch, the dusty rooms, even the patched wall in the study, it all carried my father's presence now, not as a wound, but as a reminder of his trust in me. I restored the house slowly, repainting walls, replacing broken boards, filling the rooms with light again. I chose not to take over the company. It felt poisoned, tied too deeply to Linda and Ryan's greed. Instead, I went back to my work as a designer, building my own life without their shadows. The house gave me the space to breathe, to heal, to remember my father not as a victim, but as the man who raised me with love and believed in me enough to leave me the truth. Sometimes I still hear his voice in my head, the way he called me Liv, the way he told me I was stronger than I thought. He was right. The betrayal I endured nearly broke me, but it also forced me to stand, to fight, to reclaim my dignity. I often think back to that moment in the lawyer's office, when everyone laughed as if I had been cheated. They thought I had lost everything. But what they didn't know was that hidden in that house was the letter, the journals, the evidence that would destroy them. What they mocked me for inheriting turned out to be the key to exposing the truth. Now when I sit on the porch of Ashgrove in the quiet evenings, I feel no shame, no fear. The house is mine, not because of bricks or deeds, but because it carries the story of how betrayal met justice. And though I will never get my father back, I know I kept the promise hidden in his letter. I was strong, I was careful, and I made sure the truth was heard. That is my story. The story of how I lost my father, how my stepmother and stepbrother tried to erase me, and how in the end, their greed became their undoing. It is a story of betrayal, but also of justice. And as I tell it now, I know it is not just about what was taken from me. It is about what I found in myself when everything else was gone.